Welcome for today's DIDAS Health Working Group. Today we have a special guest, Lal Chandran, who's going to present about self-sovereign identity in the healthcare sector. I met Lal physically in Helsinki 2022, if I'm right. So at the My Data Global conference, and he actually presented there already some self-sovereign identity topics. He's the co-founder, CTO, board member of Grant.io, and I heard another presentation of him about the Crane, and he is going to present the Crane findings to us today. Thank you very much, Lal, for joining us, and the floor is all yours.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit and share some of our real-world experience introducing self-sovereign identity, for example, into the health space. So today I'm going to cover a topic around what we call Crane DHDSI, or Decentralized Health Data Space Infrastructure, which is a pre-commercial procurement (PCP) project that is funded via EU Commission body and driven by 3 regions: one in Sweden, region Västerbotten, another in Norway, Agder, and another in Spain, Extremadura. So this presentation is very much a part of the knowledge sharing session to share some of the best practices around what could potentially be a European health data space infrastructure be looking like, especially looking at a decentralized architecture. So the vision of Crane, as laid out by the pre-commercial procurement, is to move 80% of the chronic patients to self-care. So basically, the prediction is that as more and more people are getting into a situation, and as the population grows, we will encounter a situation where the typical care model that we have today may not be sufficient. So they need to be a better way and more efficient and effective way of providing care to people, and that's pretty much towards moving care towards self-care, and not just from a perspective of really bringing people to take care of the health of their own, but also in situations like, for example, in some of the villages, etc. This model is extremely essential, where there is some kind of a remote patient monitoring model established, where patients or citizens can pretty much rely on a care model that is online, and that is pretty much what Crane is all about. So the entire model itself is really, how do we ensure that the data itself is protected and people have full control over the information, and any kind of information that is transacted is fully auditable, and that is a kind of vision that Crane has laid out with. And coming from the My Data, as you can see, the picture on the right side is very much coming from the My Data consortium entities vision, where what we are really targeting is really an open data model where people can decide how their data is being used, at the same time ensuring strong data protection, hopefully in a decentralized way. And this is in contrast to some of the centralized model or models where strong is given on these regulations, etc., where the data doesn't necessarily get accessible anymore. So the mission of Crane is threefold. The very first one is the enhanced care model with effective data usage. There are essentially three aspects of this. It is essentially promoting a remote and self-care model, leveraging data for personalized care, and promoting preventive care, meaning that you don't have to wait for something to happen. You can pretty much adopt some kind of an application that is monitoring yourself all the time, supported by the healthcare system in a country or region, for example. Second aspect is essentially around adopting a citizen-centric model approach to data sharing, where every data collection is with the consent or with the informed consent of the individual associated, with guaranteed full transparency and auditability in any data transaction, The priority is very much about being able to make it and bring in an interoperable, seamless data exchange. And this is pretty much where we believe self-sovereign identity technology could be fundamentally important. Last but not the least, is to break down the data silos for data-driven care and innovation. Again, how do we actually create an ecosystem which is scalable enough, where there is little or no vendor lock-in? And how do we facilitate access to diverse data, integrating healthcare, social care, and device data? So there's the boundaries between different, say, different data sources are getting blurred, and how do we actually really ensure that information can be accessed from multiple sources, which could be useful in determining your health situations. And last but not least, it's to also foster a new business model for open data sharing. So this is pretty much the mission that we started off with the Crane DHDSI towards better data management. The key requirements when it comes to fulfilling Crane data mission, I call it version 1.0, is because there's a lot of other things as well around health data space, etc., which is still work in progress. But what we have achieved so far is essentially enabling data sharing as part of an open data sharing ecosystem, which can be leveraged by any application provider to pull in data from any source, and then citizens become the point of integration where they have complete control over the information that is being aggregated in their end user application. Second is the guaranteed data quality and data authenticity. So this is one of the major concerns when you're talking about a decentralized data space. So let's say, if I come to Switzerland with my say latest of my health data, and if I want to live in Switzerland for a couple of months, for example, and if I want to go to a local healthcare entity, how can they really trust that the information that I'm really presenting is valid? So do I have to go through the whole process that I already gone through in Sweden, for example, when it comes to determining certain, say, if I have taken certain blood tests, etc., can I reuse it, out of the box in Switzerland, for example? And in order for that to really happen, what is essential is there should be a mechanism of guaranteed data quality where a Swiss entity can verify the authenticity of the data and also make sure that the information that is being presented is not tampered with. So this is yet another area where self-sovereign identity technologies come into play. Last but not the least is like whenever any entity is really consuming data or even exposing data, they want to make sure that they are on the safe side of law. So especially with all these generative AI systems, etc., pulling in data from hundreds of different sources, what is essential is that any data using service that is consuming the data has a guarantee that they are on the right side of law, and of course, right side of ethical principles, etc. The approach we have taken is that apart from, of course, going through the regular GDPR kind of regulatory aspects, there are two things that is fundamentally needed in any data transaction. One is transparency. Can we guarantee the transparency to end users about what has happened to your data at any given point of time? And can we make sure that if there's any kind of discrepancy or suspected misuse, is the entire trail auditable? Is it possible to audit that particular data transaction has taken place? And there is a possibility to tackle any kind of potential data misuse in an effective manner. And these are, in my mind, it's very similar to how it is happening in the financial world, for example. So if our money get compromised, or if somebody misuses a credit card, for example, there's a mechanism in place whereby citizens feel that, okay, I can trust the system and I can actually use my credit card freely. And that is pretty much what we think is essentially required for any data infrastructure. And this is pretty much part of the care mission that we have been working on as part of the version 1. In the version 2 is very much we have a focus on creating some kind of a health data space or a data marketplace, for lack of better wording. It's essentially where any data source can publish themselves, and every other data using service can discover them, and they're able to dynamically enter into contracts with the data sources and is able to pull data on demand as long as certain conditions are met. The conditions could be based on an agreement, which could have a lawful basis and so on. So that is essentially what we are building as we speak, or realizing as we speak, as a part of version 2. This is a overall picture of how the whole Crane ecosystem look like. So on the very left, I'll just enable the laser. On the very left is the citizen with an application. So we call it the My Health Enabler application. So this is the term that is coming from the Crane. In reality, this is being realized in the consortium that we are working on by an app called Healthy, which is a self-monitoring application. So what we have in this app that is towards the citizen is a digital wallet that is embedded, and also a privacy dashboard, where citizens can pretty much see all kinds of data contracts or data agreements that the organization is handling with. And these data contracts is one-to-one corresponding to the data processing that is carried out by the organization that is providing this service, for example. So in simple terms, Healthcare app is basically embedding and providing a self-monitoring capabilities for COPD, CVD, diabetes, etc. that is towards the citizens. Now, the way it is linked to the health marketplace is that there are a bunch of services that are provided by Healthy that is leveraging some of the data sources. And these data sources could be something that they already know and have integrated, or it could be new services that is dynamically added into the marketplace that is available to the end users as a service that they can add on. To give you an example, so let's say you are diabetic and you have a service from a local grocery shop that gives you a service where you can share your diabetic related information, and you can get probably a menu and even a shopping list straight away out of the box and so on. So those are the kind of things that we are really putting in this whole concept itself. Data marketplace, I'll talk a little bit more. So on the extreme right side, there is doctors, caregivers, next of kin, etc., which is able to pull the data from this self-monitoring system. So you can be in a call with your doctor online, and the doctor can request for certain data, and you can on demand exchange the data, and you have a complete auditability and traceability of what that information was used for, etc. And the doctor or the organization that the doctor represents is also carrying out these things via API and so on, where they are putting up the certain data requests in place in advance. The information could also be used for secondary purposes, such as, for example, research purposes. Why these marketplaces? So a particular researcher that is looking for any kind of data can search for data sources and pull the data, as long as the agreements are signed off by the individual concerned. The mechanism that we have adopted is the data intermediation service provider layer, or the DISP layer, which is what iGrant today is doing. So this concept is pretty much emerging from the European Data Governance Act. I think it's Article 12, which lays out clear guidance on how a data intermediation service provider would look like. And in our case, we use predominantly digital wallet and consents and solid pod services. So essentially what we guarantee as an entity is regulatory compliance, consents, wallet management, and a personal data store via solid protocols. And this can be connected to any kind of data sources in the backend, and it can also support multiple trust anchors. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. So this is a slide that if you're familiar with my data, this is a very familiar slide. So like a typical data exchange system, it's extremely complex, but what you see on the screen is essentially a simplified version of how it could actually be looking like from the perspective of a data intermediation service provider, and in the perspective of a digital consent, where every data transaction is auditable and with guaranteed data quality and transparency. So let's say there is at the very bottom, there is like a data source that is providing certain data, and then there is a data using service that is consuming certain data. So any source that is consuming or consuming or exposing data would embed a digital wallet solution and a consent building block solution embedded within the system. So, and these things are based on standards. So digital wallet technologies is aligning with the UD wallet, the European Digital Identity Wallet Architecture, the ARF, or the reference architecture for how the UD wallet would actually be looking like in the future. And the consent BB is like based on ISO 27560, which is providing consent management, granular consents and consent management for any organization that want to expose or consume data with the consent of the individual via what we call as a data agreement. So every entity that is really requiring data, they have, the information is fully endorsed or signed by the individual. Again, the individual is signing this via a digital wallet solution that is embedded within their end application. So that end application, in our case, in the Crane case, is the healthy self-monitoring solution, for example. And every solution has an embedded privacy dashboard where the individual is also able to go offline and opt in and opt out even after, like during the transaction, maybe they have opted in and they are still able to see what they have opted in and opted out, and they're able to control their data transaction via the personal privacy dashboard. So this is pretty much how we have laid out and borrowed the concepts from my data. And the data sources can pretty much be anything. It can be device manufacturers, it can be the national health records, it can be training apps or lab data, and it can even be identity systems and so on. And the data using services can typically be healthcare providers, social care provider, research and pharmaceutical. Of course, this is pretty much in the context of healthcare. So this is the overall architecture, high-level architecture, or the stack picture of how it actually looked like. So we have a layered model where each layer is independent. So at the very bottom level layer is the infrastructure itself, and then you have the trust anchor, data intermediation layer, domain-specific application layer, and the DataSpace portal or data marketplace. I'll explain each of these layers now. So let me start with the data intermediation layer. So as I said, what the intermediation layer really provides is every data that is consumed by the domain-specific application or an end-user application, it makes sure that the information flows compliant regulations associated with an agreement that is compliant to ISO 27560. Every information that is issued or verified follows self-sovereign identity principles. And then we've also introduced the concept of consent management via what we call as data agreements. And I will explain a little bit about that as well. And then, as I mentioned before, it also provides the digital wallet. So the domain-specific application layer is, for example, it can be a CVD or a specific disease-specific, a diabetic app, etc. And typically, there's an end-user app, and then there's a backend services. And backend services could pretty much be a data source providing insight services towards any third party, such as, for example, researchers or any similar apps and so on. So we provide that kind of a mechanism. And again, it leverages the wallet technologies as the basis for any kind of information exchange, etc. And on the app side, the app is embedded with a wallet SDK, a digital rights management SDK, or what we call as the data agreement or privacy dashboard SDK. And it also has a solid port SDK for backup and restore. And of course, the operation governance and the developer docs are also part of the whole architecture. On the very bottom or the middle layer before the infrastructure layer is what we call as trust anchor. So every data transaction to ensure the trustworthiness or authenticity in terms of where the origin is of the data and whether the data has been tampered or not, it may rely on certain trust anchors. The trust anchors could be based on say legacy system like the X509 or a PKI infrastructures, or it can be based on a ledger-based solution, such as, for example, Hyperledger Indy or EBSI, European Blockchain Service Infrastructure, and so on. So this is pretty much like the, say in our consortium, we have a bunch of companies that are participating, and we support a bunch of trust anchors. These are some of the participating companies. The domain-specific application and the healthcare app is provided by a company called Nordic Health Innovation. The entire infrastructure and the operation governance is handled by a leading integrator called Red Pill Info in this part of the world. And then we as iGrow Ontario is providing the data intermediation service providing. And in theory, all these things can be replaced by any other layer, because all these layers are based on standards. So we have a very sophisticated explanation of every various standards that are being adopted in each layer. And as you can imagine, as we go from the top to bottom, the standards move from domain specific towards more general data exchanges and so on. So this is now, I just wanted to explain a little bit about the data marketplace or the DataSpace portal. So the data marketplace has two parts. One part is towards organizations, that is data sources. DS is data source and DUS is data using service. So essentially, it's like a place where companies can meet each other and make agreements with each other dynamically. So every company that is listed, it has a say credential that is issued by the respective countries, and this is a link to some of the initiative that is now happening in the EU, which we call as the PID and the legal PID. Legal PID is like legal identifies any organization. So every organization that lists is following a self-sovereign identity-based legal PID that helps them to list in this marketplace. So all the onboarding process is extremely simplified because of the availability of LPID in a year or two from now, and that is pretty much what we are leveraging to list these data sources in the marketplace. And these agreements are also signed between parties based on the DIDAS principles and so on. So this marketplace can be deployed for a particular region. In this case, it's region Västerbotten, which is the region that we are working with and it can be for a particular disease and so on. So there's a bunch of classification, etc., that is happening in the background. But in principle, it's like a regular. So just like how you have Play Store or App Store, you have a data marketplace, and the beauty of this data marketplace is that this is not provided by a centralized system. This can be powered by one or many data intermediation service providers, that is DISPs, and which brings in the data sources into the marketplace essentially. And of course, all these things are also governed using certain governance stack. I'll briefly mention about that in my slides coming in. So the second aspect of the digital marketplace is that, so let's say the Nordic Health Initiative that is providing the Healthy app has made contracts from the marketplace with specific data sources. So these data sources are essentially providing certain services, such as, for example, the grocery store example I gave you. So that is pretty much available to the citizens to consume or to share the data dynamically, and they can also essentially say quote unquote monetize the data where they can leverage a consented data exchange to acquire certain services, such as, for example, a shopping list that is based on your health situations and so on. And these data sources that are contracted by within the marketplace are categorized into three. One is some of these data sources are very much open, meaning that anyone who actually satisfy the governance requirements can list themselves as a data source in the marketplace. Second is like a specific region or a country can say that, okay, these are the preferred partners, and then certain partners could very well be paid by a particular region as well. So such as, for example, a device manufacturer for certain diseases could be listed and prescribed by the region health entity and so on. So the data marketplace pretty much is providing this kind of subset of all the services that this company has actually signed up with. And as and when new services are entering into the marketplace, they are able to dynamically sign up, and that automatically those services get listed in the as a service catalog that is available to the citizens. So that's the second aspect of the data marketplace that we envisioned. One fundamental aspect of these marketplaces is that it needs a robust way of handling all the kind of contracts and agreements. So this is why we laid out a data exchange agreement landscape. So this is a typical situation where there is like a data source, such as, for example, a regional data repository. Then there's a data consumer or data using service, such as, for example, a pharmaceutical company, a university, and so on, that is consuming the data. So every an agreement that is between two entities, such as a data source and a data using service, is called the data disclosure agreement, or a DDA, which is what is used to sign up with in the data marketplace. Sorry about these acronyms. These are called DEXA's Data Exchange Agreement SDK. So every entity has this kind of a standardized protocol that is embedded within their system that is openly available in our model. And then the relation between the individual and the data source is handled by what is called the data agreement. So a data agreement follows an ISO 27560 scheme where every data processing that an organization has a clear purpose description, lawful base of processing, and a bunch of other parameters that are relevant from an organizational perspective to comply with ISO 27560. So whenever the individual signs a agreement, whether it is online in real time, or when the signature happens offline via, for example, the healthy privacy dashboard or the privacy dashboard SDKs, those things are cryptographically signed between the individual and the region. And the signature again is leveraging self-sovereign identity technologies to sign, etc. And that goes for both data sources and data using service. It is also possible within the infrastructure where an individual can delegate certain aspects to a third person, such as, for example, a elderly person delegating certain aspects to his or her kids, for example. And that also is addressed, and we call it the delegation agreement. And last but not the least, there could also be external suppliers, that is the data processing. So just to summarize, the actors in a typical ecosystem, as you saw before, are the data source, data using service, the individuals, and the data marketplace, where all the agreements are handled between organizations, and so on. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of why we say this kind of a model actually is highly scalable. So I introduced the concept of the data intermediation service provider earlier in the stack. So you can see a data intermediation service provider is very similar to how a telecom operator is. So every country can have one or many telecom operators, and regardless of which telecom operator your friend or your relative is using, every person is able to talk to each other without any hassle, without seamlessly across networks, for example. So it's a similar kind of model that we are educating with the DISP or the domains, the DISP or the data intermediation service provider layer, where every intermediation service provider, for example, in this case, service provider A could be bringing on board data source 1, 2, and 3, whereas B could be bringing in 5, 6, and so on. But from a overall ecosystem perspective, the domain-specific application layer can pretty much have access to data sources coming from multiple data intermediation service providers. So the data space itself, or the data space data marketplace itself, is powered by multiple data intermediation service providers bringing in multiple data sources that can be leveraged by the domain-specific application, such as, for example, the health monitoring app that I spoke about, the Healthy app I spoke about. So what it means is that it could even be across countries. So in Switzerland, maybe there's a data intermediation service provider B, and the A could be in Sweden. So if I temporarily move to Switzerland, or vice versa, I can connect to the local service provider and also have access to the local data sources with whom I want to interact with, and so on. So that is the larger vision that is possible with this kind of a model. So it's a fairly interoperable little vendor lock-in service solution that we have laid out in the Crane architecture. This is very much my last slide, talking a little bit around the governance model. So in the stack picture that I showed before, the entire stack has governance across every layer. So every layer has its own governance that is built in, which is also governed via the entity that is operating the entire data space infrastructure or data marketplace infrastructure. So this governance is laid out in the infrastructure layer. So every layer has certain responsibilities, and there are 6 levels, right from consent management to know your own service providers, then with all the signed data transactions to code of conducts to, so as you go from bottom to top, the governance actually shifts from data specific governance towards health governance. And at the very top is, if nothing works, there's also a mechanism of sanctions on non-conformance, penalty, etc. Which is very much like the concepts that is existing in various fields, such as, for example, banking or even telecom, for example. And these governance are influenced by various regulations. And this is again, we have borrowed these concepts from multiple work related to, for example, there are governance frameworks that are available in the trust anchor layer. What we have really done is aggregating all these different governance into a realizable system, essentially. That's very much what I wanted to talk about today.
Thank you very much, Lal. That's really very interesting. Also very promising architecture. I'm pretty sure there are tons of questions. I would like to open, I have a number of questions, of course, but I would like to open the round for questions for the audience. I know Fabian is doing something in this area as well. I'm pretty sure you have some questions as well. Questions from your side?
Well, thanks a lot. Quite interesting, to be honest. Has a lot of similarities to what we do at Movos. First of all, in terms of architecture, but also in terms of approach. Even though you mentioned to some extent where you see the source of data, so let's go into that detail. How do you? Well, you mentioned as a self-management aspect of empowering patients, citizens, to actually get them on board, to get them motivated and everything around that. But in a system such as the Nordics, I see how that works. That's definitely, I got the point. I'm quite close connected to Norway, so I know the system quite well. But in a Central European system that works quite different, I have doubts that you have it just on a free will base to actually empower such a system. So how do you empower the patient to be in the situation of the data original, data holder, the sovereign decision maker, and how do you get the data to the patient that is in the end validated? So what's your mechanism in that from the Nordic perspective, not from the Central European perspective?
Yeah. So that's a very relevant question, and quite often, we get asked about this as well. So typically, I say that I come from a security background, and one thing about security is that you can never guarantee security because you don't know how people really are using, and you don't know what kind of new issues pop up. So no one can guarantee privacy, or no one can guarantee security. But what we can really build in is a mechanism to remove or reduce the risk associated with all these aspects. That's what we can do. So from that perspective, the approach we have taken is that every information flow has to. So if a company is really processing any kind of data, as part of the governance, we require them to perform a DPIA, data protection impact assessment, and list that data protection impact assessment as part of onboarding to the data ecosystem. So every data processing that happens within an organization is known with an associated data agreement and a data disclosure agreement. So, and a typical data agreement, if you look at it, it has a purpose description, lawful basis, etc., where they clarify very much what they are using it for. And we have certain best practice templates how to do that as well. So now, from an individual point of view, why the privacy dashboard is able to see exactly what any organization is what data is being processed down at the actual attribute level, and they're able to, if that particular agreement has a lawful base of consent, they're able to opt out as well. It can even be legitimate interest as such. But at the end of the day, the approach we're taking is that, okay, everything has to be transparent, and the individual can pretty much decide and view those things via the privacy dashboard. And if there's a transaction that has happened, the transaction is fully auditable. So let's say, for example, and this is very similar to identity management system that has implemented the protocols like OAuth, for example. So if you have logged into any system, let's say it's supporting OpenID Connect, etc., you have acquired a token that is solely owned by you based on a key that is solely owned by you, and you're signing off logging into a system. So you cannot really later claim that you haven't logged in. So it's a similar kind of mechanism that whenever you sign any kind of say data agreement, whether it is offline or online, real time or non-real time, it is fully controlled and auditable by any external third party at any given point of time. And now, from a data consumer point of view or the organization point of view, when they pull this information from, let's say there are like 10 million people, and out of which maybe 5 million has opted in to certain processing, certain data sharing, when they pull the data, it is based on this signed tokens that this information is being pulled in. So that is yet another governance requirements that we enforce. So if there's any kind of misuse, there's a mechanism of figuring out that, first of all, you cannot, if they follow the guidance, you cannot misuse because it's based on robust technical architecture as well in the bottom end. At the same time, aided with strong governance and mechanisms to follow that governance in a strict manner. So that is the approach we have taken in this part of the world.
This is very clear to me, but on an operational level, I mean, absolutely clear with the technical and the legal background of the data sharing agreement, everything around that, that's fine. But let's go to a very, very practical element. How do you get the data in? Because in the end, you need to have it connected to the different primary systems, hospital, EHRs, whatever is out there, if there's the EHR, but and the praxis and the clinic information system and all that. But there, I think the interesting twist comes in, because technically all good, but how do you feed the system in the end from the very start? Because once everything is running, clearly see it, but before it's running, so how do you connect the whole system?
Yeah, okay. So your question is more like, where do you start in a way that is that we can start growing in with this kind of ecosystem? Is that the? Yeah. That's a very challenging question. The approach we have taken is that as part of the PCP, an advantage we have is that there is a clear self-monitoring application, and self-monitoring has certain clear requirement. So the low-hanging fruit here is that there's a need for self-monitoring in remote areas in this region, for example. So we are launching that application as the entry point into the ecosystem. And when we launch that application, there are like a few data sources that we are also onboarded as part of the initiative into the ecosystem. So there is no easy way. A data marketplace business model and making it work is extremely challenging. And there's no simple answer to it in my mind. The approach we are following is essentially identifying certain low-hanging fruit. That's what we are doing with this Healthy app and this remote patient monitoring service, and then showcasing that value. And because of the PCP, of course, we get certain advantage in launching these kind of services on a beta basis to begin with. And what we've also made sure is that every organization has an easy way to hook in themselves into this ecosystem by adopting this wallet SDKs, for example, or consent BB SDKs. And these two things are all open source and so on. So the way we are dealing with it is that anyone who want to be part of the ecosystem, you can onboard it via these things, and there's a governance system available. As long as you satisfy the governance system, you can be part of the ecosystem anyway. And the incentive for you to be available in that ecosystem is that your data can actually be consumed, and you can monetize your data as part of a governed ecosystem. So that is the approach we are educating. Having said that, this is pretty much like the thing that we are addressing as we speak.
May I quickly follow up on this classic chicken egg problem? That would have been my question. Where are you today in reality? So is it, I understand the architecture looks really good to me. I understand you're building a prototype. Is it already deployed, or is it still in the prototype or proof of concept state? Can you make a statement about that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to the actual application, so this was an application that is run by a company within Region Västerbotten. So it's a application that is live. The consent services and the digital wallet, this is a service that is up and running. So what we really did is really integrating these wallet SDKs and the consent services and the pod SDKs into the existing application and onboarded into the ecosystem, basically. So these things are already live today. This domain-specific application, one application, and the user services, and then we also have a trust anchor based on IndyLedger as well as an X509 based system. So these three layers are live today in a beta form. And then this portal is the one which we are working on right now as part of the proof of concept. And as part of the proof of concept and the MVP, the entire integration is happening as we speak. The target is by September, end of September, we have it up and running. And then the third phase of Crane would happen, where we are deploying it on a beta to, I'm not sure exactly the number of people whom we are trialing with. There's a bunch of people whom we are trialing with, where the solution will be rolled out over a period of 18 months from starting October.
So we had actually very similar discussions, as you can imagine, and as you can read from Fabian's questions. What we figured out, in Switzerland, we have a national electronic health record where we spend a lot of money, and there are not a lot of users actually onboarded onto it. And our finding is you should start with specific use cases. If you build the whole system first, you just cannot finance it, actually. Do you have specific use cases already which are running or planned to be running?
Yeah, that's the self-monitoring service that I was speaking about for
okay, so
CVD.
That's being prototyped right now and being planned for rollout.
Well, it's actually available today. So this particular Healthy app is available today, that is being rolled out as part of a regional project for addressing COPD and CVD. And what we have done as part of Crane is incorporating these, say, ecosystem builders into it. So any company that want to be part of it is pretty much going to do the same thing that we're doing with the Healthy app. Yeah.
Thinking aloud now, if Switzerland would be interested to join these activities, would that be possible in general? And if so, what would be necessary steps?
Yeah, so definitely, I don't see any issue if to make it happen. So we are a small consortium that is part of what we call as the NXT Foundation, where Red Pill, Nordic Health, iGrant, Research Institute of Sweden, etc. is there. So nothing stops us from collaborating with third party. And having said that, it is my version of it. I of course need to talk to the guys, but I don't think there would be any issue in collaborating where we can figure out a way to demonstrate something tangible as this progresses, basically.
Now comes the usual killer question: what's the business model? So how's financing being solved?
Yeah. So the business model. So that's also the interesting question. There's no one answer to it, but the approach we're taking is that every layer has its own business model, and now the business model on top of it is driven by this DataSpace portal or the digital data marketplace portal, and that is providing incentive for each party to be part of the network. So every data domain specific application will have a incentive to be part of the network, basically. So that is the business model. I can definitely share some early thoughts into it. When I say early thoughts, of course, it's been under discussion for around a year now, and we have to release some tangible results before September for sure. So I'm happy to share that business model because these are definitely in the public domain. It will be in the public domain soon.
On that note, you're certainly sending me the presentation. I'll add it to the show notes, by the way. And then if you have other material which you can provide, happy to put it on the show notes as well. So everybody who is looking into it and has access to it. So time was flying. We have to think about wrapping up. Are there any urgent questions from the audience?
One more from my side. Regulatory wise, sounds and smells like a medical device. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so that's entirely handled by this company. So they are responsible for classifying their app as a medical device, and the existing version they have, which is not integrated with the wallet, etc., is already certified as a medical device. I don't recollect exactly the certification, but it doesn't come to my mind offline. But they have the certification. They are responsible for the certifications, and that is one of the requirements in Crane phase 3. Before we trial, we need to revalidate that certification again.
MDR, most likely.
Yeah, exactly. MDR. That's right. Now I
medical device registration or something like that.
Yeah. As you can imagine, I'm more from the bottom layer and trying to get this layer. So this is pretty much like a health application that is the responsibility of other companies part of the consortium.
Interesting fun fact. Very often this is designed from a very technical perspective, but to succeed, it needs to be embraced by the clinical community. And what I had to learn painfully is they are in a totally different world.
I think the good thing is that such an initiative actually is happening where there's a pre-commercial procurement, meaning that it's a vision of is a purpose of deploying it into specific use cases. So that is happening. So that's a good thing. So we are happy to be part of something that people are thinking. So yes, I mean, when we as part of these 1 year plus journey, we have interacted a lot with, as part of the co-creation sessions, we have interacted a lot with all these regions and the healthcare professionals. Initially, there was a lot of resistance. Now, especially with the European health data space concept that is coming up, we are increasingly seeing more and more acceptance into the thought process and even contributing very proactively. So a lot of these thought processes evolved in the last 18 months.
Time was flying. That was really very interesting. Also the discussion. Thanks a lot, Lal, for sharing your activities with us. And with that, I would like to conclude the official part. Thanks a lot.